The endless void of space was broken only by the sleek silhouette of the RSV Damocles as it drifted past the flickering glow of a dying red giant. Captain Saba stood stoically on the bridge, hands clasped behind her back as she observed the crew making final preparations for their clandestine mission. The state-of-the-art research vessel was the crowning achievement of the Terran Alliance's once secret space program, built to push far beyond humanity's isolated corner of the galaxy in search of alien life among the stars. But the historic first contact they had made was far from the enlightening exchange the Alliance had hoped for. Millennia ago, humankind had merely been primitive nomads on Earth when the mysterious elders arrived from Olympus, dazzling humanity with their technological wonders and purportedly benign guidance. Only too late did mankind realize the debt of blood and labor the elders demanded in return for their patronage. Their divine wisdom had in fact been the beginnings of an iron-fisted subjugation that spanned worlds. Now at last, whispers in the dark spoke of rebellion stirring on colony worlds under elder dominion. Hidden factions were questioning the social order imposed upon them, galvanized by outrage over brutal crackdowns on recent protests. Saba herself had lost a beloved uncle to the elders' so-called justice. When Alliance High Command caught wind of this brewing unrest, they saw both opportunity and danger. Thus the orders came for the Damocles' urgent covert mission to make contact with these revolutionary groups, assess if they posed a true threat to the elders' regime, and render aid however possible. Approaching Olympus perimeter came the helmsman's update, stirring Saba from her thoughts. That glittering megastructure was the seat of the elders' empire and domain of the mysterious beings themselves, who seldom descended to the mortal plane of existence. Passing into its surrounding zone of space undetected would be their first challenge. Engage silent running protocols, all non-essential systems to minimal power output. With bated breath, the bridge crew watched Olympus loom larger in the viewport, a crystal dwarfing planets that seemed to float in defiance of gravity. Deft course corrections guided the Damocles along the edges of massive warp conduits powering the Citadel, using their emissions to mask the ship's drive signatures. But Saba knew that only bought them limited time before the Elders' omniscient sentry systems pierced their veil. Routine scanning pulses emanated out from Olympus at frequent intervals, requiring constant maneuvering to stay in their shadow. Long minutes passed in tense silence before they cleared the command nexus relatively unscathed. The entire crew collectively exhaled in relief. Next came the tricky descent planetside through the Elders' defense network surrounding New Tera. This bustling colony world deep in Elder territory was their destination, and most promising lead for investigating the rumors of unrest. "Helm, set course for New Tera. Nice and steady," Saba ordered. "Let's not spook any sleeping giants. Comms monitor all channels but maintain emission silence." She had come too far to stumble at the last mile. The Damocles glided away from Olympus under full stealth, her crew steeled for whatever unknowns awaited on the surface. What they found could potentially shift the balance of power among the stars. For millennia, transmissions of Earth had pleaded with uncaring heavens for liberty. Perhaps now, just maybe, those cries would find an answer. The blaring of proximity alarms jolted Governor Lilith from fitful slumber. New Tera's orbital defenses had detected an unidentified ship emerging from the outer planets and maneuvering towards the capital. Cursing under her breath, Lilith hurried to the command center still in her night robes. Likely another surprise inspection by the Elders to root out whispers of defiance. "Report, what do we know?" she briskly asked the officer on duty. "Vessel matches no known Elder configuration. Smaller than military ships, minimal energy signature. attempting passive scans but unable to fully penetrate stealth systems. Lilith's eyes narrowed, thoughtful. A stealth ship of unknown origin here. Her mind raced with possibilities both hopeful and dangerous. Alert me the instant you learn more, and ready the defense grid just in case. The officer nodded and returned to her station. Lilith stood behind her, fingers drumming with anxious energy as she watched sensor data trickle in. A painfully long hour passed until the ship was close enough for active scanning pulses. Lilith held her breath as the results came back. Human life signs detected aboard. Could this be the contact she had hoped for? Since crushing recent protests against their overlords, the Elders had their colony under an ever-tightening grip. Lilith had nearly lost hope of aid arriving from distant Earth or other human settlements. Yet if this ship brought tangible assistance at last— "Governor, we're being hailed," called the comms officer. "Audio only, they claim to be Terrans." "Let it through," Lilith ordered, pulse racing. She donned a headset as a stern female voice filled the line. "New Tera command, this Captain Saba of the RSV Damocles. We come in peace from the Terran Alliance, responding to your calls for aid." Emotion swelled in Lilith's chest at those long-awaited words. "Damocles, you honor us with your presence. Please dock and we will welcome you." Over the next days, a flurry of activity consumed the colony. Crew from the Damocles mingled with local leadership, sharing intelligence and technology brought from Earth. Morale soared as long-oppressed citizens sensed the winds shifting. Inspired by the Alliance's bold arrival, more dissenters emerged from hiding to join the resistance. Yet troubling news also reached them. The Elders had dispatched reinforcements to New Tera following recent unrest, led by their military chieftain Frey. Open war could erupt any day if the fledgling rebellion was to have any hope. When Saba requested a tour of their secret research labs, Lilith readily agreed despite scientists' protests. They had toiled for years unsuccessfully trying to counter the Elders' immense power. Perhaps a fresh perspective could unravel mysteries of the enemy's vulnerable points. Surely anything was justified to see humanity freed. In a secure bunker, Saba examined the results of brutal experiments upon captive Elders. To her alarm, the scientist even brought out their latest triumph, a cryopod holding a sedated but living subject. "How did you capture one alive?" Saba asked in horror. Lilith looked aside in shame. "By any means necessary for our survival. Can your Alliance experts find a weakness?" Heavy was the burden of leadership in revolution. With a helpless Elder now in their hands, Lilith prayed these horrific sins would redeem her people's future. The day of reckoning with the gods was fast approaching. The towering spires of New Tera's capital gleamed in the morning sun, belying the tension in the streets below. Patrols of Elder forces had increased dramatically lately, ever watchful for whispers of rebellion. Today, an even more ominous sight darkened the skies. The colossal crystalline warship of Frey, come to remind the planet who ruled here. In the capital's command bunker, Lilith watched the vessel's descent with dread. "Have all citizens taken shelter? This doesn't feel like any normal show of force." Her officer nodded grimly. "Our people know the drill, unfortunately. All safe in the lower bunkers." Lilith turned to Saba. "Well, Captain, can we expect aid from your contingent if violence erupts?" Saba's expression was grave. "We only have a research vessel, no match for Frey's firepower." "But," she met Lilith's gaze, "if you can get me on board his ship, I believe we can turn the tide. We must know their weaknesses." Lilith considered the audacious plan as Frey's warship settled over the city, blotting out the sun. She had one card left to play, the captive Elder. Perhaps the threat of harming one of their own could grant a boarding party access. "I hope you're right, Captain," Lilith said finally, "because today will either see us freed or destroyed. Saba laid out an emergency strategy as Lilith's forces took up positions for her desperate gamble. Either Frey would agree to allow Saba's team to board under truce, or they would threaten to publicly execute his sedated kin. She only prayed the Elder valued their own enough to accept. The time had come. In a broadcasted message, Lilith hailed Frey's warship under flag of urgent truce. The seconds stretched endlessly until finally, acknowledgement came. He would permit 2 delegates to beam aboard, no more. Heart pounding, Lilith gave the order to energize. Materializing aboard the crystalline bridge of the enemy vessel, Saba and her comrade found Frey waiting, his gaze imperious. "You dare lay demands upon me, mortal. Explain yourself before I erase your city's very existence." Saba stepped forward, steadying her nerves. "Great Freyr, we apologize for any insult, but we cannot surrender until our voiced grievances are addressed." She nodded to her teammate who held up a small cylinder, containing their captive's genetic data. "First, we must discuss reparations for your past wrongs." Frey's eyes flashed with rage at the audacity and veiled threat. For a moment, Saba was sure they had miscalculated disastrously, but to her surprise, Frey restrained his wrath and agreed to negotiations. Perhaps even gods could be reasoned with when their own interests were threatened. While her teammate engaged Frey in tense dialogue, Saba surreptitiously signaled Lilith. Now was the moment they had gambled all for. Having bought her team precious time aboard this impregnable ship, their rebellion's future would be decided here, either with a god's secrets in hand or while suffering his endless wrath. Aboard Frey's warship, Saba moved swiftly under the distraction her teammate provided. While keeping the imperious elder occupied in tense negotiations, she had slipped away towards the ship's inner sanctums. Getting in had been the easy part. Now to find some vulnerability in these gods' armor. Strict security protocols governed access to the most sensitive areas. Saba tapped commands into override panels, funneling all her expertise into breaking through. Time was against her, but at last a bulkhead hissed open. The chamber inside defied belief, even her extensive briefings. Eldritch technologies hummed, containing what could only be described as captive arcs of cosmic energies. Was this the source of their mastery over physics itself? Grimly, Saba attached her sensor equipment to download everything she could, equipment that might enable humanity to turn the Elder's own powers against them. Frey's booming voice echoed down the gleaming passageway, growing nearer. Her blood turned to ice. Had her ruse failed already? But no alarms had been raised, perhaps just a routine inspection. Saba eased back into the shadows, willing the download to complete. Moments later, Frey entered with several guards to check the containment systems. Saba scarcely dared breathe as they passed mere steps from her hiding place. Their own technology had masked her life signs for now. After an agonizing wait, Frey departed and Saba slipped away undetected. Rejoining her teammate, they concluded their sham negotiations with a flurry of pleasantries before beaming back to the planet's surface. Safe inside Tera's bunkers once more, Saba finally allowed herself an exhausted grin. The day's gamble had paid off. They had their first real advantage against the Elders. In the weeks that followed, a team of Terran and New Terran scientists feverishly analyzed the stolen data on the Elders' ship systems, searching desperately for weaknesses. If they could devise a way to disrupt the Elders' cosmic energy conduits, their divine protection might fail. It was a thin hope, but the only one remaining. Because army after army continued to descend on New Tera from across the Elders' interstellar empire in crackdowns of unprecedented brutality. Outlying cities had been razed entirely, their few survivors rounded up for forced labor. Inside the capital, Dwindling food and medical supplies created dire shortages. Lilith knew time had almost run out before the elders tired of these measured reprisals and simply annihilated them outright. She begged Saba's team for anything, a prototype, even just a theoretical countermeasure. Otherwise, their last days would be spent cowering in fear. Finally, the scientists emerged triumphant. They believed they had devised a way to disrupt the Elders' power conduits using targeted resonance pulses. But their desperate plan relied on breaching Olympus's defenses to deploy the devices. Saba and Lilith shared a grim look. There would be no second chances or miracles. By courage alone must their people now stand against the very gods. The endless night over New Tera was lit by explosions as Frey's warships pounded the last bastions of resistance from orbit. Inside the bunkers, survivors huddled in fear, their fate seemingly sealed. But Saba addressed them with resolute words. The Alliance's greatest covert fleet was en route for a final gambit, one foretold by their scientists' efforts. This day would see the Elders' reign ended or humanity itself. In high orbit, the Elders prepared a final barrage to obliterate the planet's last defenses completely. But proximity alarms blared a new contact, an entire Terran strike force emerging from warp space on the capital's outskirts. Before the stunned Elders could react, the Alliance vessels opened rifts straight into the heart of mighty Olympus itself. Saba led the first daring squadron through the Sum into the stronghold, while Elders scrambled to mount a response. Weaving between colossal crystal towers, they encountered only light defenses. The element of surprise was theirs. Saba's heart raced. The decrypted data had been right about this backdoor access point. Pressing their momentary advantage, they gunned for the central citadel where their plan could be put into motion. Reaching the massive conduits channeling power, shimmering with arcane forces, Saba ordered the devices deployed. Each ship locked resonators in place along the lattice, then withdrew to a safe distance as they activated. For several seconds, only silence. Then the very fabric of reality seemed to ripple and warp as a colossal disruption wave swept the Elders' network. Cataclysmic explosions tore Olympus as conduits ruptured across its miles-long structure under the resonance onslaught. And in the space around New Tera, Elders' warships found themselves suddenly powerless. Their cosmic mastery stripped away, they were reduced to mere metal hulls, vulnerable to human weapons. A grim cheer resounded across Alliance channels at the improbable success. Their gambit had worked, but at a terrible cost still to come. On the surface, Lilith watched the heavens literal shift before her eyes. The Elders' vessels, once untouchable titans, now found themselves lambs to the slaughter under humanity's guns. The long, bitter struggle had culminated in this moment of overturned fortunes between mortals and their gods. Their desperate ploy had been vindicated, but Lilith knew this would be far from the Elders' end. As their remaining ships retreated in disarray, she took to the broadcast channels with a solemn proclamation. While today was a victory, tomorrow promised only more conflict. Until the Elders were made to understand humanity's rightful place in the cosmos, peace could not come. But, she declared, yesterday they had been slaves, and today they stood proud against even gods. Though freedom still remained distant, the hardest step was taken. Now was the time for joy in community, remembrance of sacrifices, and healing old wounds. A new dawn had come for humankind under the heavens. In the weeks that followed, recovery and reconciliation was slow, but continual. The Alliance and New Terran stood ever watchful for vengeance from the Elders, yet for now, a bright hope burned in mortal hearts across the galaxy. Though the gods remained, no longer would their rule go unquestioned or their tyranny tolerated. Mankind had seized destiny in its own hands this day. The age of oppression was over, and that of self-determination had just begun. The Elder's twilight was here,